The rain had just stopped, but the ground was still wet and muddy around the graveyard. People stood under black umbrellas, their faces long and heavy with grief. David held his breath as the pastor's voice carried through the air, final prayers rising above the sound of soft sobbing. His brother Michael's coffin was being lowered into the earth, and with it, it felt like half of David's own life was being buried too. Michael had been more than a brother. He was his guide, his protector, the one who always believed in him when no one else did. Watching the wooden box disappear beneath the soil made David's chest tighten so badly he thought he couldn't breathe. His mother leaned on him, crying quietly, and he held her hand, trying to be strong for her, though inside he felt broken. Across from him, Vanessa stood in a sleek black dress, her veil covering most of her face. She looked every bit the grieving widow, dabbing her eyes with a white handkerchief, her shoulders trembling as if she were drowning in sorrow. David wanted to believe it, wanted to think she was truly mourning the man who had loved her more than life itself. But then, as the crowd began to drift away from the grave, something caught his eye. Vanessa slipped to the side, away from the comforting arms of family friends. She pulled out her phone, her body language changing in an instant. Her shoulders straightened, her hands stopped shaking, and then David froze. Her lips curved into a smile. A smile. Not a sad, broken one, but a bright, almost relieved smile. At first, he thought he was imagining it. Grief could twist your mind, make you see things that weren't there. But then he heard it. A soft laugh escaping her lips, light and careless. Nothing like the broken widow she had pretended to be only minutes before. David's feet moved on their own, slowly, carefully, drawing closer to where she stood beneath the shade of a tree. Her voice was low, but the words carried in the still air. "This will is my freedom," she whispered into the phone. "I'll finally enjoy life with my real love." The words struck David like a slap across the face. He stopped cold, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. His stomach twisted, his palms went clammy, and for a moment he thought he might fall right there into the wet grass. Freedom? Real love? What did she mean? Was she saying Michael had never been her true love? That all her years with him had been nothing more than an act? David's throat tightened, anger burning through the fog of his grief. He wanted to storm up to her, to demand answers right there, but his legs refused to move. Instead, he stood frozen, hidden by the shadows, watching her smile again as she ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. When she turned to walk back toward the family, her face transformed once more. The widow's mask was back, downcast eyes, trembling lips, soft sighs of loss. But David could no longer see her the same way. His brother's wife had smiled a day after his death. She had laughed, and her words left a bitter question ringing in his mind. Had Michael's entire marriage been a lie? Would you like me to carry this exact tone and flow into section 2 as we move forward? Or do you want me to make it slightly slower and more descriptive for the next part? David sat in his small living room that night, staring at nothing. The words he had heard from Vanessa kept circling in his head like a storm that would not calm down. He wanted to believe he had misheard her, that maybe grief had tricked his mind. But the image of her smiling so freely while his brother was lying in the ground was too clear to ignore. His thoughts drifted backward, to the days when life was much simpler. He could still see Michael as a boy, older by 4 years, always walking ahead of him but turning back to make sure David kept up. When other kids at school teased David for being small, Michael stood in front of him like a shield. "If you touch my brother, you deal with me," Michael would say, and just like that, the bullies would scatter. Their bond was the kind that could not be broken easily. They shared secrets, dreams, and late-night talks. Michael was the one who taught David how to ride a bicycle, how to swim, and even how to stand up for himself. As they grew older, Michael became more than just a brother. He was a second father in many ways, always making sure David had what he needed. So when Michael introduced Vanessa years later, David had wanted to trust his brother's judgment. She was beautiful, with a warm smile and a laugh that could light up a room. Everyone seemed to like her. She was polite to Evelyn, gentle with friends, and always spoke sweetly around family. But deep down, David never felt at ease around her. There was something in her eyes, something calculating, that her soft words could not hide. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, maybe even jealousy. Michael had fallen hard for her, and David didn't want to ruin that. So he kept quiet, pushed his unease aside, and hoped his brother would truly be happy. But over the years, he saw the cracks. Michael was a hard-working man, dedicated to his job, and always thinking about family first. He worked long hours to provide the best life for Vanessa, saving for a future they could both enjoy. Yet, no matter what he did, Vanessa never seemed satisfied. She wanted the newest things, the most expensive clothes, and the kind of lifestyle Michael had to stretch himself thin to provide. David often watched his brother come home late at night, his shoulders heavy, his face tired. Michael would smile anyway, pretending all was well, but David could see how worn out he had become. Vanessa, meanwhile, would barely notice, too busy scrolling on her phone or planning another outing with her friends. It was Grace, David's girlfriend, who first voiced what he had always felt deep inside. Grace was calm, thoughtful, and had a way of seeing things clearly when David's emotions blurred his view. One evening, after a family dinner, she whispered to David, "Your brother loves her, but she doesn't love him the same way. I don't know why, but I can feel it." David hadn't wanted to believe it. He shook his head, telling her not to say such things. But Grace was never cruel or careless with her words. She said it gently, with the kind of honesty that only came from someone who cared deeply. Now, sitting in the quiet, David realized how right she had been. His mother, Evelyn, on the other hand, adored Vanessa. To her, Vanessa was the perfect daughter-in-law. Evelyn was still recovering from the shock of losing Michael, and the thought of Vanessa being insincere would have been too much for her to bear. She often said things like, "Poor Vanessa, she has lost so much," or "Michael loved her with all his heart, and now she's alone." Evelyn's grief made her blind to the mask Vanessa wore, and David could not bring himself to shatter her illusions just yet. But the weight on David's chest grew heavier each day. He was torn between protecting his mother's heart, honoring his brother's memory, and exposing the truth he had glimpsed. The smile, the laughter, the chilling words he overheard, they could not be ignored forever. And then there was the will. Everyone was waiting for it to be read in a few days. Evelyn believed it would bring some kind of closure, a way to carry on Michael's legacy. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed far too calm, almost eager. David noticed the way her eyes brightened whenever the will was mentioned, as though she already knew what was coming. David clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had loved his brother too much to let his memory be tainted by lies. Whatever the will revealed, he was determined to find out what Vanessa truly wanted, and why she smiled so easily while the rest of them were drowning in sorrow. Would you like me to make section 3, will reading scene, more tense and cinematic like a courtroom drama, or keep it in the same gentle, simple flow as these first 2 sections? The lawyer's office was quiet, filled with the heavy smell of polished wood and old books. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in only a soft light that fell across the long table where David sat beside his mother. Grace was there too, holding his hand under the table, her touch steadying him. Across from them sat Vanessa, dressed in black again, though this time her veil was gone. Her face was calm, almost too calm, as if she had already accepted everything and moved on. The lawyer, an older man with gray hair and a serious face, cleared his throat. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Michael Adeyemi," he said. His voice was steady, but each word carried a weight that pressed against David's chest. David sat up straight, his heart beating fast. He wanted to hear his brother's wishes, to feel once more the love Michael always carried for family. He wanted words that would remind them all who Michael truly was. The lawyer began to read. Michael's voice seemed to echo through the room in the lawyer's words, his gratitude for his family, his hopes for their future. Then came the part everyone was waiting for. "To my beloved wife, Vanessa," the lawyer read, "I leave the bulk of my estate, the house, the accounts, and the savings we built together. I trust you to carry forward the life we dreamed of." David's stomach dropped. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself not to look at Vanessa, who sat perfectly still, her lips pressed together in what looked almost like a smile. The lawyer continued, "To my brother, David, I leave the things that meant most to me personally. My journal, kept over the years, my watch, and a small savings account. These may not carry much weight in value, but they carry my heart. I know you will understand me through them." The words blurred in David's ears for a moment. He felt a sting in his eyes, but refused to cry in front of Vanessa. He wanted to be strong, to honor Michael, but his chest ached. Everything Michael had worked for, had gone to Vanessa. And what about him, the brother who had walked with Michael all his life? All he had were memories and a journal filled with words. When the reading was finished, silence hung over the room. Evelyn wiped her eyes, whispering, "Michael was so thoughtful, so loving." She reached out and touched Vanessa's hand as if to comfort her. Vanessa squeezed her hand and nodded, her eyes glistening as though she were holding back tears. But when her gaze shifted to David, something cold flickered in her expression. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp enough for him to hear. "You should learn to let go, David," she said softly. "Michael trusted me. He knew where his love belonged. You should respect that." David's fists tightened in his lap. Grace noticed and gave his hand a squeeze, silently urging him to stay calm. Vanessa stood gracefully, thanking the lawyer, thanking Evelyn, even offering a soft smile to Grace. But to David, her words still echoed like poison. Learn to let go. Later that night, David sat alone in his room, the journal resting on his lap. He ran his fingers over the leather cover, worn and cracked from years of use. His brother's handwriting filled the pages, strong and neat, like Michael himself. At first, the entries were light, dreams, goals, memories of childhood. Then they turned to daily life, his struggles, his thoughts about marriage. David's chest tightened as he read. Michael wrote about Vanessa often. At first, it was full of love and hope, but as the months passed, shadows began to creep into the words. She stays out late these days, one entry read. Says she's with friends, but I can't help but wonder. I trust her, but sometimes I feel a distance. Another page, written shakily, said, I give everything I can, but she is never satisfied. I am tired, but I must keep going. Maybe I am not enough for her. And then a line that made David's breath catch. If my heart is right, if she is hiding something, I pray the truth will come out one day. David closed the book, his hands trembling. His brother's words were not angry. They were filled with quiet pain. Michael had trusted Vanessa, even as doubts gnawed at him. Now David knew he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Vanessa's smile at the funeral, her eagerness at the will reading, her mocking words, and now these entries, it all pointed to something darker. The seed was planted deep inside him. He had to know the truth. Do you want me to make the next section, rising tension/emotional conflict, unfold like a The days after the will reading were heavy for David. He tried to go about his normal life, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vanessa's smile at the funeral, her mocking tone in the lawyer's office, and his brother's painful words written in that journal. He could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. One evening, after another restless day, David sat with Grace in his apartment. She brought him tea and placed it gently in front of him. You can't let this eat you alive, she said softly. Michael is gone, and you need to heal. David shook his head, staring at the steam rising from the cup. He knew something was wrong. It's in his words, Grace. He doubted her. He was hurting, but he still trusted her. I can't let it go. Grace reached across the table, touching his hand. Then be careful. Don't let your anger push you into something dangerous. But David was already making up his mind. If Vanessa was hiding something, he would find it. The next day, David waited outside her house in his car. He felt strange, almost guilty, but his heart told him he had no choice. Hours passed before he saw her come out, dressed neatly, her face covered with large sunglasses. She got into her car and drove away. David followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. She drove across town to a quiet restaurant, one of those small, hidden places couples liked to go when they didn't want to be seen. David parked down the street and watched as she stepped out of her car. His chest tightened when a man appeared from the entrance, smiling as though he had been waiting for her. Vanessa's face lit up in a way David had never seen before. She leaned in and hugged him tightly. The man kissed her cheek, and they walked inside together, holding hands. David's stomach turned. There it was, the proof he had feared. His brother had suspected it, and now David was watching it with his own eye. Michael was barely in the ground, and Vanessa was already meeting another man. He stayed there until they came out again, laughing, their bodies close. The man, tall with sharp features, placed his arm around her as if she belonged to him. David clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He could not take it anymore. That evening, he went to Vanessa's house. She opened the door, looking annoyed when she saw it was him. David, what do you want? It's late. He pushed past her into the living room, his voice low but burning with anger. Who is he, Vanessa? Who's the man you were with today? Her eyes widened, but only for a second. Then she folded her arms, tilting her head with a cold smile. You followed me? How pathetic. Are you that obsessed with me? David's face grew hot. Obsessed? I'm trying to protect my brother's memory. He loved you, and you're already running around with another man. Vanessa laughed softly, though her eyes were sharp. Michael is gone. What I do now is none of your business. And if you keep following me like some stalker, I will call the police. Do you hear me? David's hands shook. He wanted to shout, to tell her she was cruel, but the words stuck in his throat. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. You think you're some hero, David, but to me, you're nothing more than a nuisance. If you're smart, you'll stop. He left the house shaking with anger and pain. The door slammed behind him like a victory for her. That night, Grace held him as he paced the room. She turned it on me, he said, his voice rough. She made me look like the crazy one. Grace stroked his arm. That's what people like her do. She's not going to admit anything easily. Please, David, don't face her alone again. It's dangerous. But David couldn't stop. His brother's journal haunted him. He remembered Michael's words about her late nights, about the growing distance. Michael had been right, and David felt it was his duty to finish what his brother could not. The hardest part was Evelyn. When David tried to share his worries with her, she frowned and shook her head. David, grief makes people act differently. Vanessa has lost her husband. If she goes out, if she talks to people, it doesn't mean she didn't love Michael. Don't let your pain make you see enemies where there are none. Her words cut him deeply. His own mother didn't believe him. She thought he was overreacting, letting grief cloud his judgment. David walked away from that conversation feeling more alone than ever. Grace believed him, yes, but Grace was outside the family. Evelyn's support mattered most, and right now, she was standing by Vanessa. The days turned into weeks, and the silent war between David and Vanessa grew. She wore her mask in public, the grieving widow, polite and gentle with everyone. But whenever their eyes met, there was a spark of cold triumph in hers, as if daring him to try again. David didn't back down. He kept watching, waiting, looking for proof that no one could deny. Each night he returned to Michael's journal, reading the lines again and again, as if his brother's words were guiding him forward. He didn't know how yet, but he swore to himself, the truth would come out. Do you want the climax section next to feel more like a sudden explosive reveal at a family gathering? The night was quiet when David sat again with Michael's journal. He had read it so many times that he almost knew the words by heart. But this time, as he turned the pages carefully, something slipped out from the back cover. A small black USB drive fell onto his lap. David froze. His heart started to pound as he picked it up. Why would Michael hide something like this inside his journal? With shaky hands, he plugged it into his old laptop. It took a moment for the screen to load, and then a single audio file appeared. He clicked it. At first, there was only silence. Then, his brother's voice filled the room. Michael's tone was soft, almost tired, but clear. If you are hearing this, Michael's voice said, it means I was right to be afraid. I don't know if I will live long enough to tell anyone in person, so I am leaving this behind. Vanessa has been giving me medicine every night. She says it's for my health, but I don't trust it anymore. Each time I take it, I feel weaker, not stronger. I've started to wonder, is she slowly poisoning me? David's breath caught in his throat. Michael's voice continued, trembling now. I love her, but I can't ignore the signs. She stays out late, she hides her phone, and sometimes when she looks at me, it feels like I am a burden to her. If anything happens to me, please, someone look deeper. Please don't let my death be in vain. David slammed the laptop shut, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Tears burned his eyes. His brother had known. He had cried out for help in his own quiet way, and no one had listened. The anger that rose in David's chest was like fire. He could not stay silent any longer. A week later, the family gathered at Evelyn's house for a small memorial dinner. Evelyn wanted everyone together to share stories of Michael and remember him with. Vanessa arrived in a black dress again, Eric nowhere in sight, her face calm and perfect as always. She hugged Evelyn gently, spoke kindly to the guests, and played her role with skill. But David was ready. When the time came for people to speak, he stood up. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. I have something to share. It's about Michael. The room grew quiet. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. David pulled the USB from his pocket and held it up. Michael left behind more than just his journal. He left this. A recording. He connected it to Evelyn's laptop, and within seconds, Michael's voice filled the living room. If you are hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. The guests looked at one another, whispers spreading like fire. David's chest tightened as he watched Vanessa. Her calm face finally cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, her fingers clutching the edge of her chair. When Michael's words about poisoning played, the room erupted. Evelyn burst into tears. My son, my poor son, she cried. Vanessa shot up from her seat, her face twisted with rage. This is a lie. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying, but her voice shook and everyone could hear it. David stepped forward, his eyes locked on her. He suspected you. He begged for the truth to be found. And now we all know why you smiled at his funeral, why you were so eager for the will. You thought you could hide forever. Shut up. Vanessa screamed, her voice breaking. She knocked over her chair as she tried to grab the laptop, but Grace stepped in and blocked her. The family members shouted, some crying, some demanding answers. Evelyn fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Call the police, someone said. This has to be investigated. Panic lit up Vanessa's face. She looked around desperately, as if searching for Eric. But Eric wasn't there. She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly, but no one answered. She tried again and again, her hands shaking. Finally, she whispered, he promised he would stand by me. But Eric never came. The police arrived not long after, called by a relative who had heard enough. They listened to the recording, took statements, and moved to arrest Vanessa. She screamed, clawed at the air, insisting it was all lies, but the mask had finally fallen. Her carefully built image of the grieving widow was gone, replaced by the truth Michael had feared. As they led her away, Evelyn clung to David, crying into his shoulder. I should have listened to you, she wept. I defended her, and all this time she was hurting him. David held her tightly, his own tears falling. We know the truth now, Mama. Michael's voice was heard. That's what matters. For the first time in weeks, David felt a strange calm inside him. His brother had not died in silence. The truth was out. Do you want the resolution section next? Vanessa's arrest aftermath. David and Grace supporting Evelyn. Justice unfolding. to be written with a hopeful, healing tone, or should it carry a somber, bittersweet feeling? The days after the confrontation felt like a storm had passed, but the ground was still wet and broken. Vanessa was taken away in handcuffs, shouting and crying, her voice echoing in everyone's ear. News of her arrest spread quickly. The police opened an investigation, not only into Michael's death, but also into her finances. It turned out that there were signs of fraud, hidden accounts, and money transfers linked to her and Eric. What had looked like a perfect life was falling apart piece by piece. Evelyn could not stop crying. She stayed in her room most of the time, refusing food, her heart shattered by the betrayal. One evening, David found her sitting in Michael's old room, holding a framed photo of him. Her hands shook, her eyes red. "I doubted you," she whispered as David stepped inside. "I stood by her, defended her, when all along she was destroying my son. I should have listened to you." David knelt beside her and took her trembling hand. "Mama, you loved him. You wanted to believe he was safe with her. None of this is your fault. Michael loved you. He wouldn't want you to carry this burden." Her tears fell on the photo, and she leaned against David like she had when he was a child. "Thank you for not giving up on him. Thank you for being strong when I wasn't." Hearing those words broke David's heart, but they also gave him peace. For so long, he had felt alone in this fight. Now his mother finally saw the truth. Grace was his anchor through it all. She stayed with him, making sure he ate, listening when the weight grew too heavy. One night as they sat together, she said, "You carried Michael's voice until it was heard. That's love, David. Not everyone would risk what you risked." David looked at her and nodded slowly. "I just couldn't let him be forgotten. He trusted the wrong person, but I couldn't let her lies be the last thing tied to his name." The legal process was slow. The inheritance Vanessa had claimed was frozen by the court until the investigation ended. For now, nobody touched the money or the property. Evelyn worried about what would happen next, but David told her not to think about wealth or houses. "Michael's memory is what matters," he said firmly, "not what she tried to take." As the weeks went on, David began to heal in small steps. He visited Michael's grave often, sometimes with Grace, sometimes alone. He brought flowers, sometimes just sat in silence, listening to the wind as if waiting for his brother's voice. The anger inside him slowly softened. He still hurt, but now there was justice moving forward, and that gave him strength. One afternoon, Evelyn joined him at the grave. She knelt, touching the soil gently, her lips moving in prayer. Then she looked at David with tears, but also with a softness he hadn't seen in weeks. "Your brother would be proud of you," she said. "You gave him dignity. You gave us truth." David swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I only did what any brother would do. He was my blood. I couldn't let her laugh be the last memory I had of him." Grace stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her presence warm and steady. For the first time since Michael's death, David felt a lightness in his chest. Vanessa's mask had been torn off, the lies destroyed, and though justice would take time, the truth had already set them free. Would you like the final moment section to close with a quiet, emotional reflection at Michael's grave, or with David speaking directly to the audience as if sharing his brother's story? The sun was setting when David sat by Michael's grave, the soft orange light spilling across the grass. In his hands was the journal, the same one that had carried his brother's secret pain and final truth. He opened it to the last page, running his fingers slowly across Michael's handwriting. "Love blinded him," David whispered, his voice low but steady. "But truth set him free in the end." The words echoed in his heart. He closed the book gently and looked at the gravestone. "You trusted the wrong person, but you never stopped loving, even when it hurt you. That was who you were, Michael, kind, loyal, giving. I will make sure people remember that, not her lies." He placed the journal on top of the grave, the leather cover catching the last bit of light before the sun disappeared. It felt right, leaving it there with Michael, as if returning his voice to him. David knelt, his hand resting on the cool stone. His throat tightened, but he forced the words out, clear and strong. "I won't let her laughter be the last memory of you. Your story will be remembered with honor. I promise." The wind moved through the trees above, carrying the sound of leaves rustling softly, almost like a reply. David closed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. For the first time since the funeral, he felt calm. Grace stood nearby, watching quietly, her eyes full of warmth. Evelyn was there too, her hands folded in prayer. They gave him space, knowing this moment belonged to him and his brother. David stood slowly, taking one last look at the grave before walking away with them. His heart was still heavy with loss, but it carried something else now too, strength, and the knowledge that Michael's truth had not died in silence. Hey besties! Thanks so much for watching till the end. David uncovered the shocking truth about his brother Michael's death. Vanessa, the smiling widow, had been hiding a dark secret all along. Justice finally came, and Michael's memory was saved with honor. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, And of course, subscribe for more gripping dramas. See you in the next one. Bye!